Let's go to the international crisis of the day with Iran. Let's get your reaction to how the president has handled it.
Well, I think boots on the ground to the Middle East, not a very stable part of the world, in order to effectuate some ill-conceived regime change. That's not a good idea. That's a less good idea than sending troops to Afghanistan for regime change, which itself is not a good idea. I think President Trump, candidly, probably did not realize that our major allies were parties to the deal with Iran to keep them from developing a nuclear weapon that he ripped up. He tore it to shreds. He never knew that China was not going to be a party to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, so he probably didn't know our allies were parties to the Iran deal. It's like the NAFTA agreement, North American Free Trade. He said it's the worst treaty ever negotiated. Well, then he had to get himself out of a tough spot because there was nothing really he could change. So he renegotiated the identical treaty. He doesn't know what he's doing in the foreign policy area. He's clueless.
Do you expect to see him try to renegotiate some version of the Obama deal with Iran?
I'd love to see it because, frankly, I think buying 10 years, during which time the sentiment in the street of the Iranian people to tilt more towards the West, and, I'm not holding out a lot of hope for softening among the members of the Revolutionary Guard, but 10 years is a long time, and I think Iran, the people, not the Supreme Leader, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the people, they don't want the hard line. They don't want the Ahmadinejad line. And I think the 10-year investment is well worth it. 10 years is a long time, and the Iranians complied with that treaty. And up until now, because Trump has so exacerbated the situation, because he's got a national security advisor, a man I know well, John Bolton, and I have some affection for John. We served together in the Justice Department. But when John Bolton wakes up in the morning, he wants to attack something or somebody. He's one of the most aggressive folks I've ever met. And we're on a course to just have a complete conflagration in the Middle East if Trump continues with this idea of, we'll send troops. Every time somebody, I think someone's insulted me, we're going to send troops there. It's totally the opposite of what he said in the campaign. He was going to be non-interventionist. If your first reaction is we're going to send boots on the ground, 20 to 23-year-old American young men and women, we're going to put them in harm's way and risk their blood because we see something in another country we don't like, because some loose, stupid person fired a missile at a drone that we're not sure exactly where it was. That's not worth troops. It's got to take a lot more than that to be worth boots on the ground. Again, I think the guy's totally over his depth.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.